We're back again with Father Edward Connolly. He's a parish priest in the Diocese of Allentown, and we're talking about marriage. We're focused on self-giving as the key to marriage. And Father, I've heard many people say, well, I should say, ask themselves the question, why am I not married yet? And when is God going to bring this right person? And this has to do with vocation, obviously. So these are people ready to make the commitment in their vocation. And I've been thinking that maybe it's the fault of those who actually say, why should I be concerned about it yet? So let's talk a lot actually, about vocation and the actual putting off of vocation. And what are your thoughts on the whole concept of putting off our vocation?
Well, some people say I have a vocation to catch fish, and why isn't God sending me any fish? But we have to point out to them that fish, at least in my experience, they live in the water, so you'd better go near a body of water if you want to catch some fish. And so some people complain and say, oh God, why don't you? Why don't you? And God says, why don't you? Why don't you? You know, they're not doing the right things. Sometimes we talk at cross purposes, I think. We like to complain. Well, that's a human failing, isn't it? Liking to complain. We like to complain. But I think many people are blowing off steam when they say that. Many people are afraid of commitment. Commitment is an awesome thing. All of us make commitments. Mr. Buono, you made a commitment to a woman a number of years ago. You've kept your commitment. I would imagine, although I don't know for sure, but I would imagine that in the days and weeks and months prior to making this commitment final, you had some thoughts, didn't you? Oh my God, what am I getting into?
Oh yes, we all do. Everyone I've talked to goes through something, but they're meant to strengthen our resolve, which is very important. Sure. But absolutely, you get the jitters. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, I knew, at least I thought I knew, all of my life, or most of my life anyway, that I wanted to be a priest. And then the time was approaching, and at that point, I was not a child. I was 28 years old. And I realized, oh my God, it's here. It's almost here. Now I have to step ahead. But you make the commitment. Sometimes you just do it and say, oh God, help me. Oh God, help me. You talk to your spiritual director. I talked to my spiritual director before I accepted priesthood. And I basically said to him, in fact, I can tell you quite honestly, I did say to him, Father, do you think that I can live this life? To be honest with you, I was talking about celibacy. He said to me, well, have you been living it up to this point? And I said, yes. He said, well. And so we have to have a sense of humor about these things. Yes. Only God knows the future. We have to walk into the future with faith in God. And for those who love God, God makes everything work together for good.
That's right. And looking at our vocations, it's so easy for people to hide behind the notion of, well, I don't know what I'm called to yet, or I'm not sure about this person or that person. I'm not sure if it's the right time. I want to build a career first, what have you. There are very important things in life that people make important, but isn't our call to whatever our vocation is of the highest importance? And don't we have an absolute responsibility before God to find out what that is as soon as possible and get into it?
I have here, by sheer coincidence, I assure you, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And here's paragraph 1604. God, who created man out of love, also calls him to love, the fundamental and innate vocation of every human being. Of course, there's more to that paragraph. So I focus on that and I say the fundamental and innate, I guess that means inborn vocation of every human being is to love. I would say, and you can give me your opinion on this, that for most human beings, love means marriage. Now, for some, not. But for most human beings, love means marriage. And so we can be reasonably certain, unless we have concrete evidence to the contrary, we can be reasonably certain that God is calling us to the vocation of matrimony.
Right. And marriage, I actually agree with that myself, because it's no less a call. However, it's not a voice. It really is a default reality. In other words, most people who are born are called to marriage. That's the reality. Most people are called to marriage and have a family and propagate
Yes.
through the having of children. So, do people get a call? I mean, I didn't per se feel, I didn't feel the call by God. However, I did try to discern the vocations of priesthood and religious life, and it was made obvious to me that those were not it. So I concluded that marriage must be my call, and I made very strong efforts at that point to find this person who would be my wife and my vocation. So people can get caught up in this whole concept of what am I called to? And I think you're right. People should assume that they're called to marriage and make very important efforts to find out if they are being called by God to a vocation which used to really be understood as to the priesthood or religious life. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely. Marriage is a vocation. Going back to what the Catechism said, all of us are called, it's our innate vocation to love. And for most of us, that means to love another man, another woman, and God willing, and usually God is willing to bring other children into the world, to bring children into the world, and to raise them, you know. I can say for myself, and I think many priests would say the same, the vocation of marriage was always in my mind. I found that marriage was not unattractive to me, but for me, I just heard this voice saying, for you, priesthood, and I said, well, priesthood involves celibacy, right? And he said, yeah, you can do it, you can do it, you know. But it's the exceptional thing to be called to celibacy. The normal thing is to be called to marriage.
Yes. And it goes back to the point of what matrimony means. The call to marriage means to confect motherhood.
Ah, exactly. The office of mother, matris munus, the office of motherhood.
Right. Let's break for a moment to our experts to hear what they have to say about the vocational call and maybe some of the problems involved with putting off our vocation.
And there's really at least 10 different ways that you can try to find out what is God trying to say to you about your life, including about the vocation of marriage. Am I called to the vocation of marriage, and who am I called to the vocation of marriage with? And really, you know, the best place, the first place to figure out, you know, what is God trying to tell me is through Holy Scripture. You know, we have the Bible, and we have the Church's, you know, 2,000 years of history of interpreting it that can tell us a great deal about who is it I'm really supposed to marry. Now, we're not going to turn to, you know, a certain chapter and verse where it's going to have someone's name as to who I'm going to marry, but rather, you know, there are principles and concepts and attributes that you're looking for in a holy spouse. You know, if you are a man, all you have to do is look at the last book of Proverbs, and you'll see, you know, what a good wife is supposed to be like. You know, a good wife, who can find one?
A young man who's in his teens, and including in college, who is well formed, should be thinking about his vocation. What is it that God wants me to do? And 9 out of 10, or 9.8 out of 10, that's going to be marriage. And so therefore, he should be, from an early age, thinking, what is the type of girl that I would like to marry? Who is the woman, what type of woman would I like to marry? Yes, he should, very much so, in a Catholic world, should be looking to get married as soon as he is ready and as soon as he is possible.
Which we can only do with the operation of normal human intelligence. I mean, if you don't like animals, don't marry a lion tamer. You know, I mean, there's certain common sense there. If a guy likes a good meal every day, he shouldn't marry a girl that can't cook. You know, that's perfectly obvious because they're a dependency. Suppose a couple meet each other, you know, and they have a lot in common, and they both want to have a large family. That's a great bond. If one wants to have a large family and the other one wants to have a small family, you've got a conflict there. This is why it's very good for people to marry people of the same religion. Years ago, the Jewish youth organization, the Youth Aliyah, used to drag me out to tell the Jewish kids to marry other Jewish kids. It was a great idea because it was going to work. And they wouldn't listen to the rabbi, but they might listen to a priest, you know.
People close their eyes to the reality of people that they're dating all the time. You know, well, yes, you know, she does seem to have a bit of a, you know, a shopping problem and a spending problem, and she's overly attached to her mother, and you know, she seems to like to party with her friends, but you know, maybe she's a wife that Proverbs describes. You know, you can't ignore the facts. So use your gift of reason to figure out about this situation.
Men can make the excuse, I'm not ready, but of course that is nothing but an excuse. So if they say, I'm not ready, then the next question to them is, what are you doing to get ready, to be ready for marriage? Exactly. And if he says, oh, well, I'm going to the gym 3 days a week now, or, well, that's not, or I go to TGIFs every weekend, try and meet girls, that's how I'm trying to get married. Well, that he's not understanding that's not how you get prepared for marriage. There's nothing wrong with doing either of those two things per se, but that's not preparation for marriage.
I think there are a lot of really great single Catholic guys out there, you know, who say that they're called to the vocation of marriage, who say they, you know, want to find a nice Catholic girl and settle down and get married and have a family. Yet the orientation of their life is that of a single man, you know, hanging out with his buddies, going to bars, you know, going to the ball game, not really worrying about, you know, is he ready to be a husband? Has he prepared himself to be a husband and father? Is his life oriented in that direction? I mean, when he has a choice, is he actually out pursuing his vocation of marriage, you know, looking for appropriate women to go out with, or is he doing something else with his time? So my encouragement to, you know, the single guys out there is to start to orient yourself. Start to put yourself through what I would call formation to become a husband and a father, because it just doesn't happen overnight. I mean, a priest goes to the seminary for 4 years before, you know, he becomes a priest. If your vocation is marriage, you need some formation for your vocation.
In our country, there's no one who starves to death, or very few. There's no one who doesn't live in a house or an apartment. That is, every graduate student, you know, in the United States in the early part of the 21st century is able to be married and have children. Now, they may not want to get up in the middle of the night, and they may not that means they may not be able to take that vacation, or maybe they won't be able to have a second car. Yes, there are sacrifices involved in having children. And the sooner they start making those sacrifices, the better, because the danger is if over time they don't make them right away, they may never make them. Mm-hmm. Or they just have two children, the ideal two children, a boy and a girl. And if they have two boys, maybe they'll have the designer baby and have the third one's a girl. But that is not Christian or Catholic marriage.
Yes, the culture says your happiness is in comfort seeking. Get as much comfort, Anthony, as you can, then you'll be happy. A lot of people believe that, you know, and they're miserable. They're totally miserable. And nothing satisfies. It's like drinking salt water. It doesn't comfort, it doesn't satisfy you. You get that satisfaction and fulfillment when you also give yourself to other people, you know?
And also, it is good for people to be married. It's good for them, their virtues. It's good for their health. This has all been shown, the statistics repeatedly. If their longevity, the people who are married, they, you know, it's the single men who create the crimes. 95% in this country. It's not the married, stable man who goes out and commits crime. I mean, we could go on and on with, which are very important statistics to back this up. So I agree with you that a young man should be focused, without being obsessed, with finding the woman that will make him a better man, the woman that will support him in his struggle in life towards holiness, towards virtue, towards his professional work, for which he'll provide for the family, and a woman with whom he knows he can grow old and mature gracefully throughout the rest of his life. That should be, entering into college, a serious consideration, and certainly after college should be something that he should want to be very focused on.
Pray. Pray and be led. I meet a lot of single Catholic women say, I'm waiting here for the right man to come. They've already decided that it's God's will that they should be married. It's certainly all right to decide that they'd like to be married. It may not be God's will that they be married. And if they did get married to somebody they're not supposed to marry, they'll be very unhappy. You know, there's a lot to be said for being single, and especially if you're not supposed to get married. And some people's personality doesn't lend itself to marriage. And if that's the case, why push it? You know, in my book on chastity, which is called The Courage to Be Chaste, I have a chapter called A Single Life with Style. And I have Celibacy with Pizzazz. When I translated it into French, the guy who translated didn't know what pizzazz was. In French, it's éclat. And he put it into French, chastity with pizza. Well, you know.
And so men need to think about leading in a relationship, thinking in a gentle way, but to think, you know, maybe I'm called here to lead with her, listening to her, but I want to lead, and that leading may be to marriage. And I shouldn't be afraid to go there. But women do walk that fine line, you know, that they, you know, you have some guys say, gee, it's the third or fourth date, she's talking about what am I looking for in a marriage spouse. These guys are, whoa, wait a minute here. I wasn't thinking about that, but women have this intuitive sense. They can, this powerful gift of intuition, they can look at a man oftentimes and get a sense of his character more quickly than a man can of a woman. So men have to respect that about the female genius. Right? Wait a second, maybe she's got in touch with God more than I am here, and maybe try to be open here. Marriage is a great calling, and men need to appreciate that more and appreciate the enormous benefits to them from being in the sacrament of marriage.
Boy, that was a good point made in there about, are people even ready? Okay, when people ask themselves, am I ready? Or I'm not ready. They say to themselves, I'm not ready to make this commitment. But what are they doing to make themselves ready? This is a fundamental problem. And what do you think is the problem with that?
People are many times anxious and afraid, and it betrays a certain insecurity in them. There is a certain fundamental readiness for marriage. Are you mature enough? Do you have some sort of an income, especially if you're the man, and presumably going to be the breadwinner, presumably. But other than that, how much readiness is required? I sometimes think anxiety about readiness is just another manifestation of a spiritual problem of refusal to, or reluctance to, commit oneself. And committing oneself is a type of dying. Now, when we hear the word dying, we get negative right away. But wait, no. Dying is absolutely necessary in the spiritual life. Jesus said, unless the grain of wheat fall into the ground and die, it remains alone. But if it dies, it brings forth much fruit. The Lord Jesus was, we presume, about 33 years old when he got crucified. Suppose he had said in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, Father, I don't think it's time. I think I just need another year or two in public ministry before I go through this. So could we postpone this? I guess the Father would have said, well, okay. But at what point would he have, surrendered himself? Self-surrender is absolutely essential to the spiritual life and to living one's life in a sane manner.
I think what you're saying is that there is always readiness to make the commitment if we are called to whatever our vocation is. In other words, the grace is there, the call is there, Therefore, you take the plunge and rely on God's graces. What's really happening is people impose on themselves excuses for why to put off the vocation they're called to. And I see this all the time. It's not to put fault on them per se, but in a way, it is so. I mean, this culture itself does encourage us to enjoy things in life before we, put the old ball and chain on us and settle down. And it's you get the impression that there is a curse that comes with marriage where you actually don't have a life anymore. But Father, in fact, it's true.
Oh, yes.
Okay? Yes. You don't have a life anymore, and that is the ultimate sacrifice when it comes to marriage. So, but that doesn't make your call to it any less real, and your need to get into it any less important as soon as possible. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. The only things that we really keep, pardon the cliche, are the things we give away, really. And that's real freedom to give it away. If you lose yourself, you will find yourself. If you bring yourself to nothing, you'll find yourself. That's what it is all about.
I have a comment about the idea of being ready. What is a person doing to make themselves ready? I was just thinking about there, as you were talking about my own 8-year-old son, Isaac. He's always walking around the house saying that he wants to be married. We don't exactly promote priesthood or marriage or anything. We're just kind of living our life around the house. And it is interesting that he mentions this, and it makes me say to myself that this is the time, that there's always an opportunity to help foster a person's vocation, get them ready. And I just have the sense that when he does get to be a young man, he probably will be ready. It won't be this foreign concept and come upon him like all suddenly because the person came along.
Very good point, very good point. I know your little boy, Isaac, beautiful kid. 8 years old, is he? 8?
Yeah.
And you had told me before that he said once that he wanted to be married and have children, and I thought that was so neat. Now, he's not ready yet, okay? 8 years old is a little bit early to get married, I would say. The church law says 16 is the minimum age for the male. But I think one of your great privileges and duties as a father is to speak positively about marriage and about fatherhood, and to exemplify it, as I know you do in your life, so that you prepare him. So I'm glad you brought that point up. It's your job, it's the job of every mother and father, to prepare their children for motherhood and fatherhood, and to help them to see how noble it is, how beautiful it is. And not simply by example number one, but by explicitly speaking to them about it. Tell your children, I presume you already do, how much you love their mother, and how happy you are that you got married to her, and how wonderful it is that God gave you children. Let them hear that with their own ears, and I think they're going to grow up pretty good.
Yeah, it's a very important thing, obviously. Now, for those who are still single, I still have this problem of the putting off of the vocation. I work with single people all the time. I see their plight, I see their realities, and the main observation I have is that they maybe are confused about when is the right time. Certainly they're saying, well, the right person hasn't come along. And I think there are elements we need to cover there eventually about what a person's doing to actually make themselves marriage material, as I call it, to make themselves ready to be caught and attractive and interesting to somebody else, that maybe this can come along sooner than they hope. But for our purposes today, the main point that I want to make about the vocation is that we are to accept what our call is and make our efforts to get into it as soon as possible, and not put it off for any length of time, not pursue a career as if it's the most important thing right now. When it's time, it's time. Got to be open whenever this person comes along, don't you think?
I say this both for men and for women. This is an equal opportunity statement. Marriage is more important than career. Marriage is more important than career. And those who postpone marriage for the sake of career live to regret it for more reasons than one.
Now, is there some confusion amongst people as well about whether they have a call to remain single? The whole notion of the singles vocation, which I don't want to undermine, because there are people who are called to remain single for a certain purpose. But we need to define this, I think. Vocation is about a self-donation for a purpose that serves others, correct?
Correct.
And so whatever we're called to in our vocation, it has to translate into serving others. Now, a teacher, a doctor, someone in the military, these are people who have very intense positions that you could easily see them saying, well, I give up my right to be married and have a family, so I can dedicate my life to serving these very legitimate needs that people have. And but then there are those, I think, that might equate the singles vocation to just, they confuse it with, because they're in the state of being single right now, that perhaps that's what God is calling them to be, is single. So, I mean, is there a singles vocation, and what exactly does that mean?
I believe there is a singles vocation. There's a man who is or was my godfather and my great uncle. I was named after him. He's long dead, of course. He was my great uncle, never married, lived to a great age. And I often think back to him with great fondness. He was like a grandfather to me and to my brother and sisters. And it was wonderful because the one who was literally my grandfather died long before I was born. And somehow or other, God kept this man on the scene, this great uncle, to perform a grandfatherly role to me and to others. And I learned so much from him. Now, why he never married, I don't have the foggiest idea. It was not the sort of thing I ever asked.
But what a benefit to you, because he had that free time. Now, I had asked Father Groeschel this very question, kind of tongue-in-cheek too. But I said, Father, is there a singles vocation? Here's what he had to say.
Is there a singles vocation? There certainly is. Again, I refer you to my book, The Courage to Be. Of course there's a singles vocation. Almost all of us can remember as kids having a single aunt who was especially nice to us because she had the leisure to do so. Or a single person who lived in the neighborhood who was kind to us, maybe a widow or a widower. They had a little extra time. Single people should busy themselves doing good works. But being single can be a great vocation. Look, I've been single for 72 years.
So in the idea of putting off your vocation, our suggestions are that you don't put it off. You have an obligation before God to get into your vocation as soon as it presents itself. Certainly as soon as you know, you've got to get into environments that will foster you finding the right person for marriage, and pray, but also fast. This is a very hidden secret in the church. I mean, the power of fasting. It's got to come back, because this requires heroic virtue to remain single while you know you're called to marriage. So fasting for bringing about that right person is very important. And if you happen to remain single, there's so much work that can be done, and you have to have peace in that. Isn't that right, Father?
It certainly is. And to any young man or young woman out there who is thinking about marrying that special person but is afraid, I say to you in the words of our late Holy Father, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Marry her, marry him, trust in God, all will be well.
And God provides. I know that firsthand in my own life, the blessings that come through being open to God's will. That's all the time we have, Father. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And remember, we have more information and resources and book recommendations and this program and all Road to Cana programs on our website. I encourage you to visit www.roadtocana.com, and please help us with yourself or those you know to get the word out about this message so we can fulfill God's will. And remember, while you're on this road, Trust in Jesus at all times and keep his peace within you always.
'Cause it